Welcome to the Results Method podcast, where real people achieve real results in the real world. Hosted by accredited sports nutritionist, contest prep coach, and three-time fitness world champion and coach, Alicia Kyrgios, alongside co-host and FMG pro athlete, Sarah Priestley. This podcast is your all-access pass to sustainable transformation. We go beyond quick fixes and one-size-fits-all plans. We break down the principles, structure, and strategies that actually create results. This is the Results Method.
Welcome back to the Results Method podcast. And today's episode is one that I've been a bit excited for because we're joined here by Sarah. We're doing a bit of a live check-in / podcast all in one, and mainly focusing on her travel pathway as she's leading into the main stage that we were originally always peaking for, which is Italy.
I'm so excited. I'm so excited to get my plan, to be honest.
My gosh.
It feels like Christmas, like getting that final peak week plan and the travel plan and just, knowing how we're going to do everything because it's a big trip.
It is. This is a really big one. I think this is probably one of the bigger ones that we've ever done together. So what I wanted to do today for this, what will be a 2-part episode for our podcast. We're going to go first part today, the travel plan and, setting her up for success in peak week. And then we're going to do another one, but it will be post-show and how it all went and a bit of a debrief, which is pretty cool. So today what we're going to walk through is what Sarah's travel plan actually looks like. So we're going to discuss the foods, the flight, strategy, and then I think we're going to go into some questions. And what Sarah and I did was pull together a bunch of questions that we know we both get asked a lot about international travel and in particular traveling for competition and how we handle those flights. So if you have ever had to do a long haul flight right for a show or you're planning to, then this episode is for you. So let's go. Let's get into it. Sarah, tell me, let's set the scene for everyone at home. Where are you at right now? Conditioning, timeline, how are you feeling heading into all of this now? Because you're about to get onto a plane in, 2 days? Sunday,
2 days.
Sunday morning, you're on that plane, girl.
2 more sleeps and I'm so excited. And honestly, since the Gold Coast show, because, we were still working to bring conditioning in a little bit, I've pretty much just been an athlete and work mode. And I was kind of just embracing that. I've been doing nothing else. I've just been doing my prep protocols and work. And then on top of that, recovery, sleep, all of that. So I feel like I've just been so dialed in on everything. And it's the best prep I've ever had in terms of my environment and the access that I have to everything. I feel like I've been really focused on just literally just ticking the boxes that we need to do and feeling really good in terms of my physique. We've definitely brought that conditioning in, which is great. I definitely feel small and tiny and I'm ready to have some carbs and fill out a little bit, but mentally feeling really good, physically, a little bit fatigued in that, but nothing too bad.
Yeah.
And just ready to get on that plane, ready. I'm all packed, ready to go.
And I think caveat for anyone listening, Sarah's probably one of the most coachable athletes I've actually ever worked with. She's phenomenal. And so for me, when she talks about being dialed in, super focused environment supporting her, she's never not 100%. This has just enabled her to go for that, I would say 10% extra, not even a 1% extra. She's not even doing the 1% extra. She's going above and beyond. And while she's feeling small, this is by far the most conditioned with the fullest physique we've got. And this is her sort of depleted. So, for anyone listening, she's in a really solid position. We're in a great place. She's come in, when we look at the map and the trajectory and the timeline with the expected projections I had at the start of our whole process, this was our main peaking stage. And she's come in, I had a range on weight for where she would sit for this show. And that includes our, fill, actually her having more carbohydrates on board leading into the show as we get to the back end of peak week. And she's currently sitting just above the very lowest part of the range, which is perfect because it means that she will sit perfectly within range come show day, which is great. So we're not flying in the day before. This is really important. I would never do that for a trip of this distance. And the timing of this trip has been built in quite deliberately. Sarah's actually leaving a couple of days before me. She will get in there well, she's getting in on Monday. She leaves on our Sunday, gets in on Monday. And we've really got enough runway after landing for her body to settle before show day, which is great. But why don't you walk us through the actual timeline, Sarah, so everyone at home can get a bit of a feel for just how, long this whole journey and process is going to be.
Yeah, so pretty much we leave on Sunday. The flight leaves around midday, so 12:20. So we'll be heading off to the airport around like 9:30 in the morning. And then that first leg is 9 hours to Hong Kong with Cathay. And then we've got a 5.5 hour layover. I think we land at like 7 p.m. or something like that in Hong Kong. 5.5 hour layover. And then at around like midnight or 1 a.m. it must be, we fly out to Milan, which is 13 hours. And then we land in Milan at 8 a.m. on the Monday. So we pretty much gain a day on the way over.
Pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. And then it doesn't stop there though, guys. We're talking about the flight, but then she gets onto a train.
2 hours.
And she goes almost 3 hours in total when you think about getting to the train other side to the venue where she's staying at. It's another 3 hours. So yeah, this is like a 27.5 hour door-to-door journey. And this is the stuff that people don't account for, right? So when she lands in Milan at 8 a.m. Milan time, her body is going to think it's 4 p.m. Monday. She's landing 8 a.m. Monday. Her body's going to think it's 4 p.m. Monday, Brisbane time. So Milan's 8 hours behind us. So she hasn't just crossed the world. Her entire circadian rhythm has been completely uprooted. So that shapes everything about how we've actually approached our strategy and exactly what we're going to get into now. So this is the exciting part. I wanted to walk through exactly what we're doing with Sarah. So what she's taking on the trip, every meal, every snack, every fluid window, because I think the specifics are a lot more useful than just the theory and how we're actually applying them, right? So we're maintaining her current intake of food because we're going to be moving into a position where she has no training, very minimal step count, and no cardio. So we're not reducing food from where we're sitting at the moment, but we're also not substantially increasing it either. We want the predictability of maintaining the current intake. So there will be no training on travel day. We're holding her current targets and we aren't reducing them because the flight itself is a physiological stressor. We don't need to go and add anything more to it by training right beforehand, right? We also don't want to reduce food because this goes to show the risk of, under eating actually outweighs the risk of a small surplus, especially on travel day. So protein synthesis doesn't pause at 38,000 feet. So the constraint that we're working with here is, and most people doing long haul flights are going to experience this, you can take food that is prepared on certain legs, but if you have to exit a plane, move to another plane, and or you're exiting and entering a new country, you can't take food with you. So it's bridging the gap as well between flights and then between flight to when you can actually prepare your first meal. So what we've done is we've factored in that she can take prepared meals on her first leg to Hong Kong. So that's cool for the first 9 hours. But then everything after that has to be stable, shelf-stable snacks and carry-on based foods, right? So we're not introducing anything new. That is the biggest mistake we can make. She's not buying anything because we don't know how it's going to be prepared. So this is what it's kind of going to look like. On Sunday, she's going to have her normal breakfast and we're going to season it exactly how she would in her normal prep. We're going to have, same level of herbs, sodium, everything as she would normally do. I want to make that really clear because there's a big temptation for people to suddenly strip sodium thinking that, it's going to make me hold fluid, it's going to leave me on the other side bloated or distended. That couldn't be further from the truth, right? Because consistent sodium levels is actually what keeps aldosterone stable. So the moment you drop sodium, suddenly aldosterone rises and kidneys start reabsorbing fluid. So you end up holding more fluid, not less. Yeah, right? And most people would be thinking that that feels a bit counterintuitive and it would be the opposite, but it's not. So she will be having a well-timed hydration strategy throughout the day too, because dehydration on long-haul flights is so severe. So she's going to be having at least a half a liter of water in before and around breakfast. That's the start of her hydration. We're going to be proactive with it, not reactive. And then at the airport before boarding, she's going to have her very first electrolyte sachet. In that first drink bottle, that'll be around another half a liter. She's going to make sure she has that completely consumed before boarding. So between waking and, probably by 9:30, she's going to have consumed at least a liter like that with electrolytes on board. So before she even sits in the seat, minimum liter, maybe more, because within the first short period of time in altitude with cabin pressure, the dehydration rate is quite high and it happens quite quickly. So we want to make sure she's completely hydrated before we get on plane. We've had the electrolyte. So once she's on the plane, she's going to already be pretty well hydrated. We've got one meal on board. We've actually pushed, and I should have noted this when we were first talking about the first meal, I'm actually pushing her breakfast a little bit later than what she would normally have, because what I want is satiation where she needs it. We don't have, training in the morning for the flight, so that, and we'll talk about meal construct as well before where I position fats, so that when it comes time to do the leg where she's sleeping, she can actually sleep without feeling too much of the hunger, right? So 2 meals in, as they're bringing around the food plane.
When you can smell all the food on the plane.
The trolley's going around and you're going to be dying. You will whip out your second container, trusty little Tupperware, and you'll be having your second meal. So the first meal is the one that you're having airport. Second meal is going to be 2 hours in. And that same meal is again going to be one that is normally seasoned, spiced, normal salt, sodium. There's no change to that, right? The second meal is going to be lower in fats, but pretty decent in both, almost a 1-to-1 ratio of protein to carbs, right? So 30 minutes before this meal, I'm going to have Sarah sipping water. I want her having at least sort of, 350 mils. Not a big guzzle. She's going to just be sipping consistently throughout the flight. So we don't need a massive bolus right before eating. I don't want her sitting too heavy or causing bloating. I just want her to continuously sip. So what we're looking for is around another 500 mils within that hour. So no electrolytes for that meal needed. Plain water will work there, but that's going to be her second meal for the day. That's going to have her eating around 2:30 p.m. our time. So she's going to eat originally first meal of the day around the 9:30. We're as you can see, spacing them right out. Second meal 2 hours in, timed with that food smell that you're going to get. The food noise is going to be high. It'll be about 2:30 p.m. our time. Then at about 7:30 p.m. our time, so about 7 hours in, we're going to hit your next meal, and we're also going to have your second electrolyte sachet. So that's going to again happen about 30 minutes before that next meal. You're going to finish this, and this will be, nothing that you're taking off the plane. So at this point, from this point on, we should be pretty close to almost your full 24-hour window of macronutrients and targets for that day, right? You should have at least 2.5 liters of water on board. That's in the first leg. And that's pretty decent for a 9-hour flight in a pressurized cabin. And then we have the fun 5.5-hour layover. What were you going to do in the 5.5-hour layover, Sarah?
Don't know, probably walk, go to the lounge, cruise around.
I actually think that's a great idea. If they've got a massage, I'd probably suggest getting reflexology or something.
Yeah. I'll bring my trigger ball and stretch band in there as well, so I can get some stretching in. But
Beautiful. I totally recommend it. And this is the best thing about layovers. They actually give you an opportunity to get some movement in, to get blood flow going, to walk around, because you're not necessarily getting to that. And remember, after this 5.5-hour layover, that's when we're going to be moving into the period where you're most likely going to have our sleep window to get on to new time zone, right? So the 5.5 airside, when we're actually in Hong Kong, is probably the most important window of the whole trip, because this is where you're not buying anything. All of your food is in your carry-on. And this is going to be where we have, and I've talked to you about this, we've shuffled some meals, still same meals you'd be having in your standard day now, but we've shuffled timing so they're ones that can be transportable. So this is where we're going to be hitting your cream of rice in your Ziploc bag and making it up. And you can get a cup of hot water, anywhere in the airport. add in your protein powder, and it's nice and easy and convenient, right? So at this point in this meal, we're also going to be having another electrolyte sachet. The timing here is quite deliberate, actually, because we're going to be having carbohydrate and sodium. They share a transporter in the gut. So sodium, glucose, co-transport. And when you have sodium alongside carbohydrates, absorption of both fluid and glycogen is enhanced. So that pairing of the cream of rice, protein powder, and electrolytes is genuinely one of the more efficient meals that you've got in your whole trip.
That's cool.
So we are rehydrating, and we're rehydrating more effectively because of that food combination. So yeah, pretty cool to know. Your target throughout that transit, so the whole Hong Kong transit, is that I want you having around 1 to 1.5 liters of fluid again, because you've just been in a very prolonged dehydrating environment on that 9-hour leg. So this is our window to catch up, right? Keep moving through the terminal. Don't sit at the gate. Try to remain relatively active. You're allowed to have a massage if you want one, though. I would highly recommend.
I will. I'll definitely be trying to find one.
Love that for you. So you'll do that meal and that process within the first hour or so of being on the ground. We're there for 5.5 hours. When you get about probably maybe 20, 30 minutes from boarding, we're going to have you have a little snack. Now, with that snack, we're going to have our 4th electrolyte sachet in 500 mils of water alongside this, because again, making sure that right before you get on that next leg, we are as hydrated as we can be. And this is also where fats land for the day. So this will be the final sort of snack before we're having an overnight sleep cycle. So it's going to be quite intentionally high in fat. In fact, in this one meal, you've got 18 grams of 18 grams of fat, and that is intentional. So
I have noticed that really helps with sleep. Like in the last few weeks, my meal plan would have had that fat in my last meal before bed, and it's really helped with sleep.
100%.
Yeah.
So it's going to sit really well before a long overhaul, like overnight flight for that long overhaul. It's not going to be a heavy meal, but it is going to be satiating. So that's the goal here, right? Have something that feels like it's still within normal prep parameters. Foods we've still been having. It's going to be salted. It's consistent with your existing intake, right? Same rule, no changes, nothing new, but just appropriate strategy for where we're positioning it for your travel, right? So I think it should help you with that sleep, because we want to get you on that new time zone as quickly as possible to manage the jet lag.
Yes. And I found the perfect little, I normally have the Pix peanut butter, and they do peanut butter slugs, which are like little peanut butter sachets, and it's so perfect for traveling.
Perfect. That's a great tip, actually. I think we'll get Sarah to share some of the links for things that she, sources, because like I said, we've done a few of these trips now where we take like pretty much all of our food or snacks on board. And we want to keep them as consistent as possible without introducing anything new, because that's a variable you can't control for. So this next leg then is going to be Hong Kong to Milan, correct? And we've got like 13 hours, and it's going to be our overnight leg, because remember, we're landing at 8 a.m. Milan time. So in this leg, sleep is the ultimate priority, right? You're not going to be drinking 500 mils an hour while you're asleep. So this is where we are going to, once you get on board the plane flight, have your 5th electrolyte sachet into your water bottle. You're going to sip it in the first hour until you sort of settle, and then you're going to get some quality sleep time, right? So it may seem like there's quite a lot of electrolyte use, but it's because it is such a dehydrating process being in these pressurized cabins, and we want to make sure that we reduce and limit as much of that as possible. And then factoring in that we're going to have that overnight where we're sleeping, you can't continue to consume water while you're sleeping. Unfortunately, we're not that talented. We're going to need to try to front load and keep you as hydrated as possible, right? So when you wake up, it should be, hopefully, ideally, around that time when it's that service leg where they're giving everyone breakfast.
There's nothing worse than waking up and you can see you've only been asleep for like 20 minutes.
I know.
You look on that flight map and you're no closer.
It's honestly the worst. So what we're going to do is we're going to have you with a bolus of protein. We're going to have a couple of snacks that provide the right structure and balance for that particular meal, because this is technically now going to be your first meal of the new day. You are also going to be pushing for rehydration because you're going to be waking up, maybe just prior or around that 2 hour from Milan's, time frame. So pre-landing, we're going to want to try and get at least a half a liter in, because we've got a period now after this flight where we've really got to try to get fluid on board. We want to have as much hydration returned as possible, and we want to get you as quickly as possible out of the airport and into direct sunlight, because that direct sunlight is 100% going to be the thing that sets the new circadian rhythm in line with that new timeline, right? Time zone. So we want to get you there as quickly as possible, and we want to make sure now we move into the eating windows that are relevant to the new time zone. So you won't necessarily feel that hungry because we've had that really good bolus of fats prior to your sleep process, and your body's going to think it's 4 p.m. Monday, not 8 a.m. Monday, right? So I want you to eat anyway, even if you're not necessarily feeling particularly hungry at that point, because we want to get on to local time. And the fill strategy post landing protocol is going to start. So we're going to manage that on the ground. And as I said to you earlier, that will all go into the system and be given to you as these are our baselines. This is what our predictable process is. However, it's going to remain quite fluid, I would say, just in case we're seeing anything or we're noting anything coming off the plane. If we're traveling really well, body's holding up really well, we're still, super tight, super dry, super conditioned, then we're going to be in a position to be able to push higher than the conservative baseline targets that I'm going to map and plan. Make sense? Cool. So any questions for me on any of that? Obviously, the very specific details on all of your totals are going to be in the system for you. I didn't want to go into it because I know macros are a very personalized and individualized process. We've deliberately, over the last couple of years, refrained from sharing totals because we don't want people to think, oh, that's what it should look like for me. Sarah is a tall, gangly, hard gaining natural athlete. So her intake might seem crazy high to a lot of people, even when she's at her lowest. And I just don't want that to make anyone feel like they're not doing something the right way, because it could possibly be exactly perfect for them. So we don't put any pressure on anyone by sharing it, but I thought I would just share how the timing of that fat, where we're putting it and why, and that she is having largely exactly the same or very similar construct of meals as she's having right now. We're just altering a couple of positions and timings.
Yep. I have 2 questions. One is, obviously I'm bringing chicken breast on the plane. Should I freeze it and bring it on frozen?
Great question. So yes, absolutely. The 2 meals that she's going to be bringing are both going to contain cooked chicken breast, an element of vegetable. It's not going to be a high fiber cruciferous because that's going to be really gas forming inside of the plane. So which will create bloating and distension. We'll get into that a little bit later. But yeah, so we're not going to have those, but she is going to have vegetable, carbohydrate, sauce, and cooked chicken. So my recommendation is always going to be that first one that she's going to consume around that 9:30 mark. That'll be when she's still in transit to the airport. It might even be when she first gets to the airport. So that one there won't need to be frozen. The next one will, absolutely. And then if we have a cooked piece in that third meal, which will be the last meal she has right before she gets off the plane in Hong Kong, that will also be a frozen one, and they will defrost in time. She won't even need an ice pack. You can, however, choose to have, something partially frozen, not completely frozen, and take an ice pack. Normally what I find is they'll just take the ice pack off you once you exit the plane.
I think it has to be under 100 ml to get onto the plane, and then they take it off you when you get off.
Yep. They won't let you through. I know New Zealand is notorious for it.
New Zealand's the worst.
My very first year of doing an international flight, this is like over a decade and a half ago, I lost my entire prep bag. I'd only flown 3 hours from here to there, and then I had the leg to LA, then to San Diego for my show for the World Champs. And I lost my entire bag. My God, I was so stressed. But anyway, I plan for everything now because that was my experience with my very first international flight. Would never make that mistake again, and neither do any of my athletes.
100%. My other question was caffeine. So when we land or before we land in Milan, can I have caffeine?
Absolutely.
Is that going to affect anything?
No issues.
Okay, cool.
No, none. We're good. Because remember, we're landing a.m. Milan time,
Yes.
meaning we don't have to worry about half-life of that caffeine preventing sleep because we're more worried about keeping you awake for that whole day to keep you in that new time zone before you go to sleep. I would say don't have any stimulants past probably 10:30, 11 o'clock that day because we do want you to sleep well. But no, there's no issue with you having caffeine before landing at all. In fact, I'd encourage it. In fact, I wouldn't be able to function without it.
I was just going to have none on Sunday, though, to help with sleep on the plane.
100%. And that's, again, good strategy. That's probably, I would possibly have one in the morning first thing because you're going to be fasted through till you hit the airport. So that for you is a pretty long window from where we normally sit on your timing, right? So I would probably say maybe have that just to get you through so you don't stab anyone in the face with your plastic fork along the way because otherwise you might. And then after that, nothing, right? Just stick to your herbal teas. And that's the other thing too. Take some herbal tea sachets on the plane with you. I would 100% have before you speak in your pocket in case that is the best coffee you get because you just never know where you're going and it is predictably always decent coffee. And we can always factor that in from a, calorie point of view. So I think that's pretty much everything. You're going to be wearing full skins as usual, full skin tights on the legs, full skin tights legs and top, plus then compression socks, over your tights. We'll be moving the whole way. You won't take those off until you get to where we're going.
Yeah, I'm planning to wear like a warm tracksuit over top as well because I know from previous flights on prep, you get really cold.
You have no insulation, lady.
Yeah.
Okay, so next thing we did was we just pulled together some frequently asked questions. And I know I always get that Sarah's been getting every time an athlete travels for competition, I pretty much get very similar questions. So you want to hit me with one?
Yeah. So what makes a competitor look watery after a long flight?
Well, this has probably got many variables, but if you're not wearing compressions, I think first and foremost, you're already opening yourself up to potential disaster, 100%. But there's three main mechanisms that can happen all at once, right? So the cabin's going to dehydrate you, 20% humidity, you lose fluid through every breath and through your skin for 13 hours without even feeling it, right? So that's the thing. You don't know that it's happening, but it's happening. And that's why I talk about, it may seem excessive with the electrolytes, but they're for a reason because the body's going to respond to that fluid loss by holding on to water as a protective mechanism because it's like, oh shit, what's going on? This is happening way too fast. We're going to now hold. And so the body's going to respond, hold that. And then on top of that, you have immobility. So you're slowing your venous return. It's pooling in the lower extremities because of the quite heavily sedentary, position because we're not allowed to get up and stand in the aisles for long. We can't sit in the aisle. We can't lay down. So you start to get pooling in particular around the legs and the ankles, which is where the compressions really help, right? So then we need to factor in, as I touched on, why we don't travel before we fly. The flight itself is a physiological stressor. So the minute we've got that happening, we've got pooling, we've got physiological stressor increase, and we've got dehydration, we're going to have a major combination where together the kidneys are going to hold on to both sodium and water. And it's just such a perfect storm, right? And if people are then cutting out salt and doing all these other crazy things, exacerbates it again. So most likely, I would say you're going to step off the flight looking pretty similar, if not potentially maybe even better than when you boarded because of how we're approaching the flight, right? And it's not just your conditioning. This is like we're trying to mitigate those variables with everything that we're doing.
I think stress probably affects a lot of people as well. Like if you're afraid of flying or traveling stresses you out.
Yeah, way more. And, so what happens when we get that physiological stress? Well, we get the hormone response, right? And so cortisol rises and then we have that, separate but parallel pathway where so does aldosterone. And so that is where the kidneys get affected. So when I talk about that process with the kidneys, that's because we've had this, perfect storm happening, right? So we are just naming it and calling it before it happens and planning for it. And then we've got that runway of time where we've deliberately brought you there very early. So we've got that ability to, allow your body to settle in afterwards if we need it. But I actually think we're going to be pretty darn close.
Yeah, I think we'll be good. And another tip as well from me is book an aisle seat, because you're going to be getting up
Get
to
up and
pee all
walk
the
around.
time and getting up to walk around. So you don't want to have to like climb over people that are sleeping.
Yeah. Yeah. Another thing that I always get asked about is, do macros and calories change on a travel day? I would say that on occasion, there will be the odd athlete I have where it does for a specific reason. But again, it's all very individualized, right? And with Sarah, I would say no, we don't need to. We're going to be holding the pattern where we are. We've got predictability. We've got the proximity to the show. We've got the right structure at the moment where digestion is perfect. Like we've got no variables that are actually affecting her. We also don't want to risk under eating. So she's not training. She's also got a reach step count. Like her target will only literally be like 6K. And it's going to be no cardio. So holding where we are, we'll have a really nice, level of intake to maintain her in this travel process with no protein or no muscle breakdown in the journey. So
And when you say same intake, you've obviously calculated that out based on like, is it 24-hour windows? Because we're obviously gaining a day.
Yeah.
So it's not like we're getting
And so-
an extra day of food.
No, we're not. We're not. And so you got to think, even though we might be breaking that initial meal to get onto the right time zone in Milan, it might be within that 24-hour window, potentially from her last meal. She's going to go to sleep earlier. So, and then she's going to sleep and then she'll be on that new window. So it will marry out. But yeah, it's all going to make sense.
It blows my mind how you calculate all of that.
It's all going to make sense. It is all going to make sense. And I'm trying to time it so we're on that new time zone and we're feeding into that, both from a timing perspective for fueling and then also hitting that sunlight and trying to recalibrate so we sleep better that night, right?
Yeah. And then when I'm on the flight, should I be walking around? Like what should I be doing?
Yep. Every 90 minutes until we hit that sleep leg.
Yep.
So in every single leg, up until that one that is Hong Kong to Milan and we get that overnight sleep, every 90 minutes. It'll be up, short walk around, a little bit of movement through calves, a little bit of stretching in the aisle if you can get away with it before someone harasses you to get back to your seat. What we're doing is basically just prevention, right? We want to make sure we've got no DVT risks. We also want to make sure that we've got no fluid pooling because as we talked about, that's one of the mechanisms that leads to bloating, fluid retention, everything else. If you're not doing any movement at all, it can result in quite a softer finish or look when you get to where you're going. And the terminal stop for the 5.5 hours is really about just gentle movements. You don't have to be walking that whole time, but I just want, you'll be doing some activation stuff. You'll be doing some stretching and mobility stuff. There's still going to be movement where we've got blood flow going, circulation going, and we're not, getting that pooling for 27 hours straight, right?
Practice some posing.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, it's good to front load that stuff because once we hit that bigger leg from Hong Kong to Milan, you're sleeping. Movement in a sleep leg is really low. So we know that rest is more valuable than circulation. For a conditioning perspective, sleep is definitely more valuable. So we don't want to compromise and not sleep. We need that sleep leg. We need it for conditioning, for recovery from, the week and the stress of the flying. We also need it for getting you onto the right time zone. So we can't avoid no movement there. So we've got to make sure that we don't sit like a sack of potatoes for the entire period prior, right? Makes sense?
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, cool. So do you train on travel days? I always get asked. And I'm like, no, I would rather we adjust and auto-regulate training prior to that day because, as we've talked about, travel is already a physiological stressor, right? So it's one of those mechanisms that's going to lead to conditioning change and a shitty conditioning finish if we don't manage it. So fluid shifts, circadian disruption, we've got elevated cortisol, compressed air in the cabin, we've got broken sleep, we've got all these things. So if we go and then add a training session to it on top of that, we're just literally pushing shit uphill and we're working against your recovery capacity, right? So rest is the focus on a travel day. Post-landing, we're going to assess the condition and assess how you're feeling and some biofeedback before we even make any training decisions on that day either. a gentle walk in sunlight to set the circadian as a primary focus, and then we can look at what we do after that. It will be a gentle stimulus and a rollover and circulatory focus, not necessarily about smashing yourself or creating more systemic fatigue. We don't need that.
Yeah.
But we'll always assess first. You'll be sending me photos, videos, check-ins like you do every single day, multiple times a day. I will get an update from you when you hit each leg. So when you get off in Hong Kong, because I will still be here on the ground. I will just wake up during the night, make sure that I'm checking on you. If there's anything goes wrong, I need to navigate. If something happens to some of your stuff and we need to, make decisions on the fly, I'll be available. But essentially, it's going to be, those checkpoints. And as soon as you land, I'll assess and give you instructions, because then I will be on a plane coming to join you.
Yeah, perfect. And then in terms of digestion and gut issues, how do we avoid any issues there?
Keeping things the same or very similar, no new foods, nothing purchased out. People will often think convenience, let's pack like protein bars and or completely new processed foods. And I'm like, there's nothing inherently wrong with those things at all, but it's just a variable that you don't know, that you haven't been using. So one thing you can do to combat this is to have already factored that in and been using them from several weeks out and assessing and testing and knowing that it's okay. But then you've got to consider where I'm going. Do I have access to those things again there? Do I need to be bringing them with me? Because you're better off using what you already know to be tried, tested, true, and digestively friendly. Gut's already happy with it. We haven't seen any, issues or negative feedback from it, than introducing something crazy. And the other thing is too, we're not having anything that's going to be, we're not having cruciferous vegetables. We're not having legumes. You're not having carbonated drinks. None of that from the minute you board that plane. Nothing fried, nothing with sweeteners, nothing at all that is unfamiliar. And we're using all the same, carb sources, protein sources, and we're using things that are low fiber, low residue. We just basically don't want to land in Milan and you are full of gas.
Yeah.
Because any of those things we just talked about is going to give you that. And travel constipation is really real. It is the worst if you've ever experienced it, because it's like dehydration, disruptive routine, depending upon what you're eating. And especially if you're eating plain food. Oh my God. And you've ever gotten off a plane and you're like, I am so descended and I feel like Shamu and like I've just, I don't know, inhaled like I'm a hot air balloon or this gas. That's probably all of those factors as to why that's happened. And we're going to try to mitigate all of them.
Absolutely. And then what can we do to manage that jet lag as well? So we can actually sleep when we get there.
Great question. Physiologically, the easier direction for us is traveling west, because the body uses, hang on, I'll start that again. Okay. We're traveling west. So Milan is 8 hours behind Brisbane. And physiologically, this is the easier direction, because the body needs to delay its clock rather than advance it.
So on the way home,
we're going to be screwed. We're home, we're screwed. But you won't care, because you're going to be full of pizza, pasta, hopefully carrying a crown. You're not going to care. So the strategy for us is the watch goes to Milan time the minute you're in Hong Kong. I just want everything on Milan time. So we're going to sleep through as much of the 13-hour flight from Hong Kong to Milan as possible. I'm going to get you to take some melatonin. We're going to land in Milan at 8 a.m. We're going to get outside into the natural daylight as quickly as possible to reset that circadian, because light is the primary signal that's going to do that. I'm going to have you eat that breakfast on Milan time, like I said to you, even though your body, it's going to be later than your natural dinner time here. So therefore, like I said, you may not be hungry, but we're going to eat it anyway, because what we're wanting is that rhythm of eating and that new time zone across all areas as quickly as possible. We're going to actually push you where you do not nap. There is no rest. You do not nap. I don't want any disruption to the wake period. So then the sleep period is really good. And you're probably going to need melatonin for the first couple of nights. Yeah. Look, it's not the be all and end all, but if we can get even just that little bit of support, we're going to be using it, right? I reckon probably the first 2 to 3 days will be the worst of it, and then it should pass. We've given ourselves enough runway. We're there really early. You're there Monday, you're on stage Sunday. So we have that period.
Whole week, yeah.
But ideally, I want to try and give you a feeling as good as we can straight out the gate, right? So your schedule's really been built in with the buffer, but also to try to optimize your landing capacity so that you kind of hit the ground running and don't feel like total pus.
Sounds good.
So another question I always get asked is, does poor sleep actually affect conditioning? And I'm like, yes. The research shows it very clearly again and again and again that this is a direct mechanism on finish. And I don't know if you've ever seen it, but you've seen an athlete and you're like, man, I've been following her, I've been so excited to see her. And then you see her on stage and you're like, what happened? And they just look like, I don't even know. I actually had 2 of these at the Gold Coast show just recently. I was like, oh man, I was really thinking this chick was going to come out and just dominate. And then they get like a podium finish, but they don't hit the first. And I'm looking at them and they look soft, a little bit more watery. They looked better like a week out, 6 weeks out even. And they got like a cankle situation happening. Like I actually pinpointed to a couple of the girls, 2 girls where I was like, man, I really thought they were going to be the front runner. And they literally, I could see their feet swelling in their heel. And I'm like, ooh, okay. So a couple things. That's probably not just sleep, by the way. I'll throw that out there. That would have been an electrolyte, potassium sodium imbalance, I would say as well. But sleep is a major impact on this. So poor sleep dysregulates your entire hormonal balance. So as we talked about earlier, it's that whole cortisol, it's the fluid retention, it's the activation in parallel that's telling the kidneys that, geez, we better hold on to sodium and water. And then you just kind of get that softer, more, I don't know, it's just all conditioning kind of flattens out. So sleep deprivation is one of the things that will be a real contributor to this. And it also significantly impairs insulin sensitivity.
Wow.
So if you've got an athlete that's like really anxious and is going to, be that, anxious brain, doesn't get a good night's sleep the night before show, doesn't get a good night's sleep for a couple of nights in, or maybe has young kids traveling with them and that sleep is just good luck getting it. They're the ones I watch for when it comes to any kind of carbohydrate intake or loading, because I know they're not going to be able to partition that substrate as well because of those factors. And so 2 nights of broken sleep close to show day can significantly alter the visual outcome on show day.
That's so interesting. I feel like it would impact your like mindset and decision making as well. And you're also going to be way more hungry, right? If you don't sleep.
100%. And then, you think about it, you wake up, you've had a really crap sleep, or you get off a plane and you've not slept and you look that little bit more watery, lines you had are gone. Like, what's that going to do to your mental state and your nerves going into that show? It's going to absolutely shoot them out. So
spiral.
Yep. So I would always say to people, for me personally, I'm like, sleep, especially in that back end of peak week, is even more important than meal timing or meal perfection. I would say it has physiologically more impact. And so if you know you're an anxious individual, really focus on as much of that, grounding and try to get as much rest and sleep as you can in those days preceding show, because it's going to really impact what you present on stage.
That's so interesting. And what's one thing that competitors always underestimate about international travel when there's long legs for shows?
What have you found the most difficult?
I would say probably is the sleep, but it's almost like for me, like I don't really get stressed or anxious. I more get like really excited. And I'm like filming all these YouTube vlogs and I'm editing them and I'm excited and you're like messaging people at home and then you're like, shit, it's way past my bedtime.
I gotta get
and you just like I just really struggle to wind down and sleep properly. And then I think it's just like managing all of those elements. Like it's so much to organize. You have to be so organized to get the meal timing right and get everything right, really.
Yep. And so my advice to someone that is like Sarah, and there is no coincidence that Sarah's flight path looks like it does, is that we get there early so that you're set up. You're set up for the trip. You're mitigating all the variables as much as you can. You want to keep their, confidence high when they get to the other side by bringing the physique as close to the conditioning they left with, if not maybe potentially even better. Christina actually landed even better than she took off, which was for the first time ever. So it can be done. And people that don't handle flights well need this even more. They need a longer runway to settle in than someone. So, and you'll hear this, like I've got a couple of athletes where they're like, even just going from Brisbane to Melbourne, their lower extremities would blow up. Wow. And so we know that for certain people, you've got to have that runway. You've got to have time. You've got to be planned. But I would say that anyone that is going on any kind of international travel or any kind of, pattern like this where it's multiple leg journeys, if you have not got that planned and you have not got, a strategy that links to you, which it might not just be the physicality, but also like we're talking about that psychology, anxiety, excited. We know you're a certain type of person. If you're a little more A-type, high strung, most likely to be that I'm so excited individual, then you want to have runway and you also want to have a strategy, because if you don't, that is where then you're going to probably potentially, run into issues. So again, work with your coach. Hopefully your coach knows you really well in and out, and that you've got a game plan around all of those variables.
Yeah, I think for me, like going into this big trip, I just have absolutely no stress because I know like we have our plan. Yep. I'll execute that the best I can. And then if anything goes wrong, like you're available. So I'll just contact you and we'll fix whatever we need to fix. Like anything that's outside of my control, there's no point in stressing about it.
No, and it's so true. And I'm going to say this because this is something that I see all the time. Get off Instagram, get off social, don't compare yourself, because, this is probably the thing that I see brings most athletes undone. So if they're looking at someone else's process, protocol, flight path, travel, whatever, and then they're analyzing against their own, it can create more issues than, positives. And I just think remove it. So I have been known, I was having this conversation with someone the other day, and one of my funniest situations was with one of my pro athletes when we hit LA. And it's gone back a while now, probably about 8 or 9 years ago. I laugh just thinking about it. She fucking sent me another pro's, story, right? And I had already been dealing with this chick going through comparison trap, and she had the potential to win her category. And the person she sent me was actually in a different category, one up, so even more conditioning, because she should have more conditioning. And she sent me this person's, and it's quite a high profile person, and she sends me their thing. And I'd been dealing with this for days. We're on the same flight, like we'd been traveling together, and we were in the same house, and she sends it to me on socials. And I just stormed from my room into her room. I grabbed her phone off of her and I said, "That's it. I'm cutting you off." I said, "Open up your Instagram right now." I changed the password and then I logged her out and I said, "I will post everything for you for the next 4 days. You're not getting access. I'm keeping you completely off it. You can't pass go. You cannot collect $200. You are in jail for the next 4 days, IG jail." I took it off. The best thing I could do. But the funniest thing was, because I had been dealing with her, my immediate response was just, get the fuck off socials, right? But I wrote it to her, to the post she sent me, which meant I didn't write it to her. I wrote it to the high profile athlete.
I would have just followed it up and be like, "Because you look so
I actually did. I was like, babe, fuck, I'm not sending you this to you. I sent this to my athlete that had sent me you, worried about you. So please take this as a compliment." And she, thank God, she was laughing her ass off. And she was like, "Nope, I do. That just was," she said, "That was actually exactly what I needed, because I've been a little in my head." And I went, "Great." I screenshot that and I sent it to this girl's boyfriend and said, "You can show her this," because even the person she thinks this, thought process of is worried. Mm-hmm. And so what I would say is no matter where you think you are and no matter who you think is potentially going to do better than you, they're having the same thoughts you are. But my biggest advice is get the fuck off socials. Anyway, funny story. Good way to close it out. But thank you so much for sharing this with us today. I'm glad we got to do this one. I want to say to all of the athletes looking at the moment to do the travel over to Italy, good luck. I hope that you're all well planned with good execution of the plan in the process and that you all arrive on the other side looking incredible. I don't need to say good luck to you. You won't need it. You're going to be a jet. You're going to just execute. And I know I'll be in your ear, in your corner, and in your pocket the whole way until I'm physically with you. But for anyone listening, I hope this was really useful. Save it, send it to someone who's traveling. We're going to be back on the other side with a debrief episode. So that'll actually be cool because we'll talk about what actually happened versus the plan.
Yeah. Hopefully.
And I say this laughing because shit happens, man. It happens. And the good thing about working with me, Sarah knows, is I usually always have a contingency list up my sleeve. So no matter what happens, I've got a few different things we can throw at a scenario. The queen of putting out fires. But I also keep it light. So if something happens, we crack jokes.
We laugh about it.
The whole thing's fucking hilarious. And then we're into the next process. We're into the change. We've got the alternative. We don't miss a beat with it. And I think I want to end on that because I want everyone that is about to have Murphy's Law slap them in the ass, because it will. It's inevitable. Think about what we just said and try to keep pretty lighthearted with it and try to have some game plans just in case scenarios because you're going to need them.
Yeah, absolutely. Just take the next best step, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So fingers crossed it executes well, and we'll be giving you a debrief and telling you it was epic. Otherwise, we're going to be giving you a debrief, cracking up and sharing lots of funny stories.
Yeah, stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
That's it for today's episode of the Results Method podcast. If you found value, make sure you subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who's ready to level up.